Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Hacks in the Wild by White Hack Labs. My name is David Harris, and I am a partner at White Hack Labs and an attorney in Miami. In this webinar, we will be discussing the latest news and trends in the world of cybersecurity. Our first topic of the day is the 5 industries most vulnerable to data breaches in 2024. Several industries have been targeted with data breaches, and it's costing businesses in the US millions of dollars per breach in damages and recovery expenses. The good news is that while the number of breaches rises, so too does awareness and investment in cybersecurity measures. In 2024, 5 industries have been targeted more than others. The number one targeted industry is manufacturing. According to the IBM X-Force Threat Intelligence Index of 2024, the most vulnerable industry to data breaches is manufacturing. Manufacturing businesses are increasingly at risk of cyber threats, mainly from business partners and software supply chain attacks. These are some of the biggest cyber attacks, accounting for 15% and 12% respectively of all cyber incidents. The number 2 industry is healthcare. In 2024, the healthcare sector has been facing serious challenges toward keeping patient data safe. In fact, the number of healthcare data breaches in the United States has gradually increased within the past few years. One of the main reasons behind this rise in healthcare data breaches is the increasing digitization of medical records and the adoption of electronic health records, EHR systems. While this technology offers a number of benefits in terms of efficiency and accessibility, it also introduces new vulnerabilities that can be exploited by cyber criminals. The third industry is digital agencies. Digital agencies store valuable customer data, including personal information and security logins. To minimize the risk and liability involved when managing client data, these agencies are investing more than ever before to get ahead of cybersecurity threats. The fourth industry is retail and e-commerce. Over the past few years, we've seen some big data breaches in the retail sector, with one study pointing out that North America had the largest fraudulent transaction value of any regional market. Specifically, the region accounted for over 42% of global commerce fraud by value in 2023. The research cited the vast volume of data breaches and the broad availability of stolen credit card information as the key risk factors in this market. 37% of all breaches involve payment card data information, according to the Verizon Data Breach Investigations report. The fifth and final industry is tech companies. While tech companies should naturally be better equipped to handle data breaches and cyber threats, the reality is they are not immune to such incidents. One of the primary reasons for this vulnerability is the vast amount of sensitive data that tech companies possess. From personal information to proprietary technology, these firms look after data that is highly valuable to cyber criminals. In conclusion, while these industries are more vulnerable to data breaches, they are also at the forefront of efforts to strengthen cybersecurity practices and mitigate risks. The increasing frequency and severity of data breaches highlight how important it is for these industries to bolster their cyber security measures. Now let's talk about healthcare data breach statistics. There was no let-up in cyber attacks on healthcare organizations in 2023, which set two new records. First, the most reported data breaches and the most breached records. In 2023 alone, 725 data breaches were reported to OCR, and across those breaches, more than 133 million records were exposed or impermissibly disclosed. It is not just the number of data breaches that are increasing as the breaches are becoming more severe. 2023 smashed all previous records with an astonishing 133 million records exposed, stolen, or otherwise impermissibly disclosed. This huge total for 2023 includes 26 data breaches of more than 1 million records and 4 data breaches of more than 8 million records. Looking at the list in front of the 10 most healthcare data breaches, you will note that 6 of the 10 occurred in either 2023 or 2024. 2 of the top 4 is Kaiser Foundation Health Plan, with more than 13,400,000 records being breached, and the 4th is HCA Healthcare, which had more than 11 million data records breached for that year. Now let's talk about HIPAA penalties. The penalty for HIPAA violations can be severe. Multi-million-dollar fines are possible when violations have been allowed to persist for several years, or when there is systemic non-compliance with the HIPAA rules, making HIPAA compliance financially as well as ethically important. Here on the screen, you can see the penalty structure for HIPAA violations in detail in the infographic on the screen. Looking at the screen, you can see HIPAA violations are broken into 4 tiers. The first tier is for violations where a company is unaware of the violation and is exercising reasonable due diligence. Fines can range from $137 to $68,000. Tier 2 are for companies that have HIPAA violations and have reasonably caused that the covered entity knew or should have known about the violation and exercised reasonable due diligence. The fines in that case range from $1,000 to $68,000. Tier 3 and Tier 4 are for violators more severe. Tier 3 is for willful neglect, but for companies that have cured the violation within 30 days. Tier 4 is for companies that had willful neglect but did not cure the violation within 30 days. The violations for both tiers can range from as low as $13,000 up to as much as $2 million per violation. As you can see from the chart, the financial penalties for not protecting healthcare data can be significant and costly. Healthcare data breach statistics also show that hacking is now the leading cause of healthcare data breaches, although it should be noted that healthcare organizations are now much better at detecting hacking incidents than they were in 2010. Now let's talk about the next topic, CVEs and their impact. Here we have 4 examples that were recently in the news. The first is OpenSSH vulnerability. There is a massive vulnerability in one of the popular internet protocols used mainly by Linux machines for remote access, which is called SSH. A vulnerability was discovered that would allow remote unauthenticated attackers to perform remote code execution on vulnerable servers. The attack involves difficult to execute race condition that takes several hours to accomplish on a single host. Nevertheless, millions of publicly exposed SSH hosts are currently vulnerable, as this exploit is likely under wild exploitation. The next example is vulnerability in Magento and Adobe Commerce. Recently, a proof of concept for a vulnerability identified as CVE 2024-34102, which affects the Magento and Adobe Commerce e-commerce platforms, has been found online. This vulnerability allows for unauthenticated XML entity injection attacks. The impact of this vulnerability is considerable. An attacker who successfully exploits this flaw could, 1, access sensitive files on the vulnerable server, 2, gather critical information that can be used for further attacks, 3, compromise the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data managed by the e-commerce system, and finally, number 4, perform lateral movements within the corporate network, increasing the risk of broader compromises. The attack exploits the ability of an XML parsing system to process external entities, allowing an attacker to induce a server to read local files or make requests to other network resources. In this specific case, the POC attempts to read files from target servers that are vulnerable to CVE 2024-34102. This type of attack can lead to the exposure of sensitive data, including configuration files, access keys, and other critical information that could further compromise the system's security. The next case that we have to discuss is Cisco Switch Privilege Escalation. A China Nexus cyber espionage group named Velvet Ant has been observed exploiting a zero-day flaw in Cisco NXOS software used in its switches to deliver malware. The vulnerability, tracked as CVE 2024-28399 with a CVSS score of 6.0, concerns a case of command injection that allows an authenticated local attacker to execute arbitrary commands as root on the underlying operating system of an affected device. By exploiting this vulnerability, Velvet Ant successfully executed a previously unknown custom malware that allowed the threat group to remotely connect to compromised Cisco Nexus devices, upload additional files, and execute code on those devices. The issue stems from insufficient validation of arguments that are passed to specific configuration commands, which could be exploited by an adversary by including crafted input as the argument of an affected configuration command. Finally, the last topic for today on this is the Magento HTTP file server. CVE 2024-39943, also known as Magento HTTP file server vulnerability, affects versions 3 before 0.52.10 on Linux, Unix, and Mac OS platforms. Remote authenticated users with upload permissions can execute OS commands through a shell using exec sync instead of spawn sync in child process in node.js. The risk score for this vulnerability is 72, indicating a high potential of danger to organizations. To remediate this vulnerability, users should update their Magento HFS to version 0.52.10 or newer. The exploitability score for this is 3.1, and the base severity is rated as critical with a base score of 9.9. So now let's talk about 4 types of data breach damages listed here at the top. The first is consumer trust, followed by brand reputation, and then lawsuits, finally, legal fines. So we have a question for the audience today. Which breach damage type are you most concerned about? The question will be sent to you now. For those of you watching the stream, please post your answers in the comment section. Thank you for your answers. Today, we will now talk about the featured topic, which is CVE 2024-28255. This is a flaw in open metadata. I would like to introduce you to my colleague, Cameron Hassan, who is the cybersecurity researcher. How are you doing, Cameron? Are you here?
Hey, yes, I'm here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm doing good.
Well, thank you for being with us. So Cameron is going to take over the presentation, and Cameron will talk more about this vulnerability, and he will walk us through the exploitation on a sample open metadata application. You can now take over, Cameron.
All right, thanks, David. So, as you can see, today's topic is CVE 2024-28255 vulnerability, which allows attackers to basically bypass authentication in open metadata by exploiting a path parameter vulnerability. So let me just share my screen quickly over here, and let's go ahead and check out their official website. So I just wanted to show the I just wanted to talk about what open metadata is before diving into the technicalities of this vulnerability that has been recently disclosed in it. So what is open metadata? So open metadata, as you can see over here, is an open source metadata management tool that is designed to help organizations manage and govern their data assets. It provides capabilities like understanding different data assets across different systems and environments, and it's being used by many engineering teams across the world, as you can see here on their official website. You can see all the logos that are using this platform, all the logos of the companies that are using this platform, this software, this piece of software. Uh, and well, I agree that this platform is really convenient when it comes to reducing the gap between business owners and technical users. And that justifies its popularity. If we go over the official GitHub repo, as I told you that this is an open source software, so we have the code on GitHub right here. As you can see, the popularity is there. And uh, as I just told you, the platform is really convenient. So that justifies its popularity. However, recently, a critical security vulnerability was disclosed in this open metadata software that sent shockwaves across all the teams that were using this software to manage their data assets. And uh, we also covered this vulnerability that was recently disclosed in it in our blog post. So what happened? So so just to give you some context right, over here, if we so open metadata basically expose bunch of different APIs, and some of these APIs require authentication, while some do not. And if we can go over here on this tab, here we have the vulnerable code actually. So what happened is this JWT filter. Uh, where is this? So this JWT filter right over here uh, is basically responsible for acquiring and verifying JWT tokens for authentication of all the APIs that this software exposes, right? However, if you look at this line of code that is highlighted over here, inside the filter method, so we can see that not all the endpoints require authentication, right? Those excluded from the authentication are listed in the excluded endpoints list right over here. If I can just show the value of this excluded endpoints, here it is. So, and we can see all these endpoints are excluded from the authentication, JWT validation and authentication, right? So, and this actually makes sense from the functional point of view, because these endpoints here you can see the login endpoint, the registration endpoint, the sign up endpoint. These endpoints obviously should not expect JWT tokens, since they are meant to give users their JWTs in the first place. So users can then use that JWTs to interact with other authenticated APIs, right? That's the normal, usual uh, code flow or the functional flow of the application. That's usual. But this exact line of code that we had highlighted over, let me just go back over here, resulted in the authentication bypass vulnerability. So let me just explain. So when a new request comes in, the request path is checked against this list right over here, excluded endpoints. But when the request path contains any of the excluded endpoints, this filter returns without validating the JWT, just like that. So there is a possible exploit vector here, and that could be like the attacker will include a string within the path parameter that matches a pattern in the excluded endpoints list. So for example, if I can go over here, so I already have a local environment setup for this for with a vulnerable version of the software right over here on port 8585, as you can see. And right on this tab here, you can see this is one of the API. So if you can just look at this API, if I just try to send a GET request over here, you see that uh, that it's giving me an authentication error, right? It's giving me a 401, which means not authorized, token is not present, so the request will not go through. Right, and that's okay because we didn't send any authentication token because we didn't had any authentication token in the first place as an attacker, right? So, but how can, as an attacker, how can I bypass this authentication? And so the line that we were discussing right over here, that this actually made it very easy for us to bypass user authentication. So what happens? This is the normal API endpoint, right? Like this API v1 event subscription validation condition. All right, and here on this tab, I just made a simple change. So what I did is I appended this path parameter called v1 users slash login here. So now if you can just if I can just send the API request call here, you will see you won't get any for one error this time. So no authorization error. So that this is just because I'm not sending the exact data that it was expecting it. So it's just a bad request error. But the 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 point to focus over here is we ain't getting 401 errors anymore. We have successfully bypassed the authentication. So it should have asked us, hey, you need to send us the authentication token, the JWT token to access this API. But we were able to do it by just adding this simple path parameter value v1 users login. And what happened over here? Why did it allow us? So it allowed us because the pattern that we added in the path parameter here is actually included in the excluded endpoints list, right? Here, v1 user slash login. So this made the whole thing very easy for any attacker. So now by successfully bypassing JWT validation and authorization, the attackers, we as an attacker can gain unauthorized access to a bunch of different open metadata's APIs. Well, this vulnerability could result in many exploit vectors because obviously we now know how we can actually go ahead and bypass authentication on any API that this software is exposing us, right? But the one we have covered in our blog post right over here is the spell injection. So those who don't know about spell injection, spell is basically Spring expression language, and spell injection is basically a type of security vulnerability that occurs when an application using spell allows untrusted user input to be evaluated as part of a spell expression. So this can enable attackers to inject malicious code that gets executed by the application. And in our POC blog that we recently published on our website, we use this exploit script, right? This right here to execute commands on the system that is running a vulnerable version of open metadata. And as I just told you, we already have a vulnerable version of open metadata running in our local environment. As you can see, it's live on 8585, and I'm using Docker to basically host this vulnerable environment. So the server of open metadata is actually a Docker container, right? So what I can show you over here uh, is is an example of what this exploit script is capable of that we publish on our website. So the first command that I can execute over the over the vulnerable version over the vulnerable deployment of open metadata on my local host is I can like I would like to run this command over the system which is running our open metadata deployment, the open metadata server. And in our case, we already know we have a Docker container, right? So what we can do is before running this, because this command we already know this should create, if it is being run on the server, then it should create this file in called peon in the temp directory, right? And just to make sure this does not exist already, so what we can do is we can go ahead and grab the Docker container ID from here, just like that. Okay. And what we can do is we can get a bash shell. Perfect. So we have a bash shell inside the server, inside the Docker container that is running the open metadata server. And just to verify that this file does not already exist on the server, we can just list tab directory like this and see we do not have it. We just have this one folder that exists in the temp directory right now. So what we can do is we can go ahead and execute the script like this. Okay, so it has printed us what what the final payload URL of the exploit uh, would have looked like. So as you can see in the final payload URL as well, the target URL. So we actually use the same vulnerability to bypass authentication right here as well. Here you can see the path expression we have included is v1/user/login, and the same API we were calling back then in the browser tab. We are still using that same API to inject some spell expression. So here is the spell injection. In the spell injection, we can see over here, this is a base 64 string of the command that we wanted to run right here. And we also are printing the base 64 string, base 64 conversion of the command string that we are trying to run over the server here as well. Then, okay, so this was, it says the command executed successfully. The script is saying that. So what we can do is we can just verify by going to that same temp directory again and list it down. Okay, so we can see that we have the file that we wanted to create. So our exploit script was able to actually perform or execute this command over the server that was running the vulnerable version of open metadata, the software that we are discussing today, right? So so now now we know that how we as an attacker can actually bypass authentication in any APIs. Now we have like uh, endless possibilities and endless exploit vectors from here in that we can execute. One of it is like we can even cause an outage in the service by what if I run a command like this? Hey, kill uh, all the processes that are being that are running on the server. So what processes are being run over the server? Let's see what we have got here. Okay, so we can see that there are 4 processes that are currently running on the server. That includes the open metadata server as well. All right, so what we can do to cause an outage is just run this command to kill all the processes. And let's see, we have, all right, so I made a mistake. I think the command, okay, so it should be minus. All right, perfect. Oh, okay, so you see that all the processes that were running were killed by the command that we just executed using our exploit script. Now the server is offline, so it's not accessible anymore. We have just caused the service to break down, right? And we are simply able to do all of these things with the server of this open metadata just because it's running an vulnerable version of the software that hasn't been patched against this vulnerability that we just discussed, CVE-2024-28255. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share even about the CVE-2024-28255. As you can see, a successful exploit can have severe consequences for organizations that are still using the old versions of the software. So all such engineering teams need to take swift actions to reduce and address this vulnerability. Otherwise, they are at risk of getting compromised. So I think that's all from my end on for the slide. If you have any questions, just let me know.
Cameron, we do have a question from the audience. So the
Mhm.
question is, how long has this vulnerability been exploited in the wild?
Okay, so David, this vulnerability was patched in version 1.2.4 of OpenMetadata, which was released on back in I guess January 5th, 2024. But if we look at the commits, I have the commit history right over here of the file in which the vulnerable code was there. So GWT filter, just show. Okay, so we know that this was the line that actually made it possible uh, to bypass the authentication in all the APIs, right? And so this is the vulnerable code, and we can see that this vulnerable code has been there since 19th of September 2022. So that means this vulnerability has been there in the software for almost 1.5 years. So I think that gives us an idea how well this has been uh, exploited in the wild, right?
Thank you, Cameron, for your demonstration today of conducting real-time ethical hacking on open metadata. The preventative hacking practice that Cameron just demonstrated for you could have prevented the damages that we discussed earlier during this event. So what are the benefits of ethical hacking? Here we have four. The first is improved security, where ethical hackers can help organizations identify and address vulnerabilities in their systems and networks. This allows companies to protect their sensitive data and assets. Number two is compliance. Ethical hackers can help organizations comply with regulatory requirements and industry standards for data security. Third is cost savings. By proactively identifying and addressing vulnerabilities, organizations can avoid the costly consequences of data breaches and reputational damage. Finally, number four, to prevent a disaster. Ethical hackers can identify and report vulnerabilities that actual attackers are going to use to infiltrate your system. So now we have another question for the audience. Which cybersecurity benefits are you most interested in? For those of you that are watching the live stream, please post your answers in the comments section. Now let's talk about the benefits of a penetration test report. Specifically, let's discuss penetration tests and their use in four of the most common compliance frameworks. The first is PCI DSS compliance. What is PCI penetration testing. PCI penetration testing is designed to include assessment of network infrastructure and applications from both outside and inside an organization's network environment. PCI penetration testing must be performed on an organization's complete cardholder data environment, CDE, and includes any systems which may impact the security of the CDE. A PCI pen test will help to identify unsafe system and network configurations, improper access controls, rogue wireless networks, coding vulnerabilities like XSS and SQL injection, broken authentication and session management, and finally, encryption flaws. Now let's talk about the second compliance, SOC 2. SOC, SOC, is an acronym which stands for System and Organization Controls, and the controls refer to a series of standards that measure how well a given service organization regulates and conducts its information. Penetration testing and vulnerability scanning are two critical elements that can be used to assess the security of a computer system and verify the overall security posture of an organization and put to the test the controls designed to protect against cyber attacks. The intention is to identify vulnerabilities and exploit weaknesses to compromise and demonstrate impact on a particular system, a network, or an entire organization. Is penetration testing a requirement for SOC 2? The answer is no. While penetration testing can be valuable for any organization, it is not required to achieve or attain SOC 2 compliance. However, auditors often recommend pen testing assessments to augment the audit. There is a mention of a pen test in SOC 2 criteria, suggesting that it can be one of the methods used to perform the required evaluations. The third compliance today we will discuss is HIPAA. The Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, also known as HIPAA, sets rigorous standards to safeguard sensitive patient information in the United States. As cyber threats evolve, simply adhering to standard compliance protocols is no longer sufficient. This is where vulnerability assessments and HIPAA penetration testing becomes indispensable tools for healthcare organizations. So what is HIPAA penetration testing? HIPAA penetration testing is a specialized form of cybersecurity assessment specifically tailored for the healthcare industry to ensure compliance with HIPAA. This process involves simulating cyber attacks on an organization's digital infrastructure to gain access to E-Fi and identify vulnerabilities that malicious entities could potentially exploit. What sets a HIPAA penetration test apart is its focus on the unique requirements of the healthcare sector. HIPAA mandates the protection of administrative, physical, and technical safeguards. Penetration testing for HIPAA compliance specifically targets these safeguards, ensuring they are robust enough to protect sensitive patient data from unauthorized access and breaches. So does HIPAA require penetration testing? HIPAA does not explicitly require penetration testing, but a pen test is highly recommended as a measure to protect patient data. However, pen testing can support meeting numerous requirements set out by HIPAA and aligns with the NIST recommendation in achieving compliance with this regulation. Finally, the last compliance we will discuss is FINRA compliance. FINRA is the U.S. government agency authorized by Congress to protect investors by overseeing over 600,000 brokers across the country. FINRA evaluates firms' approaches to cybersecurity risk management through reviews of their controls in areas including technology governance, risk assessment, technical controls, access management, incident response, vendor management, data loss prevention, system change management, branch controls, and staff training. Does FINRA require penetration testing? The answer is no. FINRA does not have a requirement for penetration testing. However, they highly recommend penetration testing as part of their report on selected cybersecurity practices. This report presents FINRA's observations regarding effective practices that firms have implemented to address select cybersecurity risks, while recognizing that there is more than one approach to cybersecurity. FINRA details the following practices that have been implemented while conducting penetration testing. These include adopting a risk-based approach to penetration testing, thoroughly vetting testing providers, establishing contractual provisions that carefully prescribe vendor responsibilities, and rigorously managing and responding pen test results. As most financial institutions hold extremely valuable personal information, such as social security numbers, bank account information, and credit card information, it is highly recommended that companies conduct annual penetration tests at a minimum. So what is White Hat Labs and what do we do? White Hat Labs is a security testing and evaluation company. We discover security weaknesses before attackers do. Overall, we give you an X-ray into your organization's security posture. So what are the offensive security services provided by White Hat Labs? We offer two basic services. The first is a penetration or pen test, and second, a red team engagement. The difference between the two is that a red team engagement contains an element of surprise, while a penetration test does not. So now we ask the audience, if you have any questions for us today, please submit them now and I'll try and answer them as well. I don't see any questions today from the audience. This concludes today's webinar. We have here on the screen some useful contact information, including our email address for inquiries. Also, you can find useful links to our social media pages to read more about us. Thank you so much for being with us today.